This video is sponsored by Raycon, more on that later. This is possibly the greatest downfall of a YouTuber ever. Blair, aka iilluminaughtii, started the year as a beloved creator known best for her fight against the powerful and corrupt, but has since become synonymous with the very evil she swore to fight. And just a few months later, she is perhaps YouTube's most universally hated creator in years, struggling to capture even a tenth of her previous viewership. And possibly the most shocking part of all of this is that Blair's years of alleged abuse, extortion, and conspiracy were only exposed because of a minor feud over video editing. And while I've been covering the situation as it develops, I wanted to provide a comprehensive review for how we got here as we head into what looks to be the final chapter of iilluminaughtii. See, Blair, aka iilluminaughtii, is a YouTuber that primarily makes content exposing multi-level marketing, pyramid schemes, and generally the exploitation of others. And while they had been dominating this genre on YouTube, Blair started seeing trouble on April 20th, and it's only gotten worse each day. See, all this started because iilluminaughtii came out with several accusations aimed at Legal Eagle, a lawyer who found massive success on YouTube with his videos breaking down legal issues in the public eye. More specifically, Blair released a series of tweets accusing Legal Eagle of plagiarism and ultimately copying her style of videos, which is a huge accusation, so it's a good thing she came with evidence, or at least tried to, failed, and made it very clear that she is not the lawyer in this situation. See, one of Legal Eagle's editors had reached out to one of Blair's to inquire about an editing effect that the latter had used in an iilluminaughtii video, but that effort was unfruitful. So Legal Eagle's team ended up figuring it out on their own and had used the effect in some of their videos. And based solely on that, iilluminaughtii accused Legal Eagle of trying to replicate her videos, which as a video editor myself, I can easily respond to those accusations. They were really dumb and not worth dwelling on. For starters, the effects that iilluminaughtii are referring to are common to see in documentaries. Her and her team didn't invent any of this. In fact, they're pretty generic visual effects. But two, even if she had invented this effect, she doesn't own it. Taking inspiration from other creators or artists is how online content or art grows at all. I mean, take this effect that editors often use for a clip that is too low of a resolution. Almost every online editor has used this trick at some point. Are we all guilty of plagiarism? What about thumbnail metas? No, because you're talking about such a small part of the package that is a YouTube video. It's especially dumb when you remember channels that rip the exact thumbnail, scripts, and production of large channels. You know, actual plagiarism. So for Blair to target Legal Eagle and question his integrity over her lack of understanding of what creating is, it led to her receiving a ton of backlash from everywhere. And it wasn't long before people were accusing iilluminaughtii of being guilty of actual plagiarism, such as taking excerpts from a documentary verbatim in her own script. And in the face of all of this negative publicity, the floodgates against iilluminaughtii have been absolutely unleashed, with multiple former members of the collab channel Sad Milk coming out and detailing their experiences with Blair. More specifically, Twitter threads and later videos were released by The Click, OneTopic, Blair's former employee Wonderstruck, and her ex-partner Oz Media. These four have come out in solidarity to detail the abusive and controlling behaviors allegedly suffered at the hands of Blair. And in each of these four cases, Blair's behavior apparently escalated into obsession once they severed ties with her, often involving instances of conspiracy or extortion.
What I can only describe as retaliation from the person who's my ex, former employer, and prior colleague, Blair is in the process of currently foreclosing my home.
Just to get back at an ex-colleague. She did this, she paid people to dig up dirt, make alt accounts, harass me for months. Why?
I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, via transportation, income, and housing.
This wasn't just trying to separate yourself from us like we asked for. You acted like this was a war and that you should be recruiting soldiers to come after us. You lied, and I can only think that's because you wanted us gone.
And The Click went on to expose an entire conspiracy that Blair was spearheading against these four, but I'll get to that. But first, I'm going to tell you about this video's sponsor, Raycon. Look, Raycon have made a name for themselves as the destination for premium audio at an affordable price, all thanks to products like their everyday earbuds and everyday headphones, plus their new line of Raycon Home and Raycon Power Tech products. Raycon provides premium tech products at a fraction of the price of their competitors, and their products have earned tens of thousands of 5-star reviews. But they sent me a pair of their everyday earbuds, so what do I think? I really like them actually. I have AirPods, but switched to using these, and they are honestly way more comfortable and sound just as good to me. So I plan on using these going forward and would say they make for a great gift. And no one told me to say that. That is actually how I feel. These are pretty great. And I gotta let you know about the early Black Friday promotion for all things Raycon, with 20% off everything, not to mention 25% off fitness earbuds, 30% off tech kits, 30% off impact earbuds and impact speakers, and 50% off select items. And yeah, those are great discounts on products that are already budget friendly. Get an early start on holiday sales by shopping Raycon's early Black Friday sale today. Go to buyraycon.com/JimmyRobbins or click the link below for 20 to 50% off site-wide. Seriously, check it out. They're a great product and it's a great way to help support the channel. Thanks to Raycon for helping keep the lights on. Now back to the video. And across these dozens of tweets, Blair's reputation and credibility took a huge hit. And while it's necessary to say that these are allegations and not proven facts, the consistency in these stories does raise a lot of questions about Blair. Questions she tried to answer in a 42-minute response video. And to say that the reaction to this video has been negative would be a massive understatement. The dislikes outweigh the likes, and the comments are universally negative, with particular criticism being aimed at iilluminaughtii seeming to play the victim, violating multiple people's privacy, and refusing to consider any responsibility for her actions. And honestly, the video was shockingly unfocused and sloppy in my opinion, which might sound harsh, but Blair spends most of the video not even trying to respond to the accusations, but instead trying to undermine the credibility of the Clique and Wonderstruck through unrelated character assassination. She provided very little evidence that was directly relevant to claims of her behavior, and the bits of relevant evidence that she did provide were shown to be taken out of context by the Clique and Wonder, which I'll get to. And while the video seemed quite unfocused to me, one aspect really stood out: the distinct manner in which Blair addressed each of the 4 individuals who shared their experiences with her, employing a unique approach for every single one. For example, you have the Clique, where she basically tried to paint him as this horrible enabler of child abuse.
He cultivated an environment that was a breeding ground for inappropriate behavior with minors to occur, and that's exactly what happened.
As well as being guilty of using offensive language to the discomfort of those around him.
At the time in 2020, Clique was still using horrifying language and slurs that have long been deemed unacceptable.
More specifically, Blair seemed to look for any small thing Clique said so that she could respond by attacking his character based on loosely related events that it seems were very misrepresented. But throughout all of this, she does very little to dispute his actual claims towards her behavior. But let's start getting into specifics. Clique says in his thread that Blair had spies working for his Discord, a pretty quick mention which led to Blair going into a whole section about how Clique had an issue in his Discord where there were adults acting inappropriately with minors, which he was directly enabling.
He allowed this sexually explicit language to occur around minors. He referred to them as spies, which only shows that he didn't really see any issue with the state of his server.
And she repeatedly plays up that there are victims of Clique's negligence.
I am sorry to those minors who were spoken to, providing links in the description box for a few resources for anyone who has been negatively impacted by these events. I wish that the Clique had more accountability of his own server, and some of you likely are still children. If you're a child currently in a similar situation, I urge you to speak to adults. Should not be having sexually charged conversations with you, or this is and always has been unacceptable, which only shows that he didn't really see any issue with the state of his server.
Which, before even getting into how the Clique seemed to prove that she was being very misleading with this section, what does any of that have to do with anything? 2 people can suck. That defense hardly does anything to address his accusations against her. And she relies on that defense again in response to Clique saying that she took advantage of bad PR against him to punish him by ensuring that Clique's bad PR was being constantly brought back up. In response to that, Blair said that Clique was using the R word in 2020, which, like, what does any of this have to do with anything he said about your behavior and character? And if it sounds like I'm going easy on him, just wait until I get to Clique's response, because he does a really good job in my opinion of debunking these 2 claims, which ultimately leaves Blair with no defense against Clique's depiction of her character. And while initially the Clique was the face of those speaking out against Blair, Wonderstruck was where this really escalated, because most of Blair's video was focused on Wonder's claim that she gained control over his life. And in this section, most people agree that Blair crossed a line in a deeply disgusting way.
What she did to Wonder is the most gross expose I have ever seen. Not only does she openly share his potential suicide note,
where she discloses very personal and intimate details of Wonder's mental health, such as him expressing suicidal thoughts to her. She also makes claims about Wonder being an unreliable employee, over-exaggerating their dealings, being neglectful towards his dog, and forcing her to repossess a car she had leased him due to his negligence. Basically, while she focused on the Clique's character, she focused a lot more on portraying Wonder as unreliable or unstable, even using things that she had learned in confidence to help make this case. Though one topic she mostly glosses over. She mentions an instance of yelling at him, says it was because he talked over her in a call that she didn't want to participate in, but says very little towards him specifically. And lastly, there's Oz.
She also dodged Oz's entire statement, which, yeah, I'll let him tell his side of the things too.
Now, Blair cries while discussing her time with Oz, which they responded to by directly calling her manipulative and saying it was a tactic she would frequently use. And while we now know they had a romantic relationship, neither Oz nor Blair initially acknowledged their connection as such. But again, Blair did very little to acknowledge everything Oz and OneTopic had said about her. If I'm being honest, a lot of the video felt more like trying to drag down whoever she could with her, more than defending herself or setting the record straight. It felt like when there were minor disputes she could make, she did, but those disputes did very little to combat claims of her being controlling or manipulative. The most that she says is that she was forced to exhibit those behaviors at times because the others dropped the ball as business partners, which might very well be true, but when these four guys who have clearly been in a fair amount of conflict with each other are agreeing that the problems go beyond that, that's not a great look. Also, Illuminaughtii states that they accept responsibility for their actions, but nearly everything they respond to comes with excuses, so many were saying she did the opposite. So, negative reception aside, what has the fallout from this video been? Well, it initially seemed like Blair's accusers were satisfied airing their grievances on Twitter, but Blair's video sparked a stronger response. Over the last few months, each of these four creators have taken to YouTube to present their experience in greater detail, as well as any relevant evidence of Blair being deceptive. This started with The Click, followed by Wonderstruck, OneTopic, and most recently, Oz Media. And with each video, the outrage against Blair has only become stronger, and Oz has shared that he is working on an hours-long expose to hopefully close this saga, but I'll get to that, because I want to give you an understanding of each of the four videos released by Blair's accusers, starting with The Click, who presented a compelling case that much of Blair's accusations against him were framed in an incredibly misleading way. For example, the so-called groomer that was welcome in his Discord, that all happened while he was sleeping.
In the allegations against me, it is claimed that I didn't react or respond to the situation. Number 1, being asleep at 2 AM detail was completely left out. 2, the fact that he was actually banned before this whole thing was left out. And 3, a receipt of Illuminaughtii reaching out to me to get me to respond wasn't shown in her video or allegations. And the reason for this is that it doesn't exist.
Additionally, his Discord has 44,000 members and over 3,000 bans because this behavior is a problem consistent across Discord. In regards to her accusations about him being an enabler, Click basically asserts that he does what can be expected of him, and her attempt to say otherwise was disingenuous.
I am proud of you. It sounds from this chat, starting from the time I was caught up on the night's events to the time after our voice call, that it worked out quite well.
Additionally, Click points out that Blair refrained from showing his own words in regards to these events.
As you can see from this chat, this was already resolved a while back by that time. In the same conversation, we also talk about the out-of-context other screenshots she shared in her own video. It's odd, if she wanted to paint a full picture of these events, she didn't include my own words on the matter, but just insinuations. Words she had access to this whole time.
He also said that Illuminaughtii had been lying about interactions between them long before her recent video.
Here's a screenshot where she's sharing that same group call and saying, "This is that call where I railed Click for not doing anything for months." Note that this date is in October, a couple of weeks after we had left Sad Milk. The statement about us leaving was made in November, but we had actually left a month prior. So the twisting of these events have been going on for quite a while.
And he concludes this segment saying this.
And if you still don't believe me, you can check out my Discord yourself. It's linked in every description of my channel, and my staff and I do our best to make it as wholesome and supportive as possible. So I'm surprised it's being painted in such a dark way when it's right there. You can actually just go look.
Now, in response to accusations about his language in 2020, Click spoke to Oz directly, whose words Blair had used as evidence. And Oz not only says it was likely that they were exaggerating, but he and Blair would often come up with narratives of how to spin things behind the scenes. Make a note of that, it's pretty important. He also calls out several examples of Blair presenting as a savior despite actually doing very little in a given situation.
I spoke with YouTube directly. This is something that I now look back on with so much regret. Had I known at the time what was going on behind the scenes, I never would have participated in helping Click with his channel.
Why was this in the video? To be clear, my channel was restored by the help of my network, which is a service I pay for. She might have tagged YouTube on Twitter or chatted with support, but the fact remains, she wasn't the one who saved my channel.
He also provides a pretty convincing example of her trying to start rumors about those who went against her while having deniability.
Here is Sad Milk posting on the 1st of November, 3:28 AM, that Salty Click and OT will not be continuing the new journey with Sad Milk and we're leaving the channel. And here's a tweet from Illuminaughtii saying, "Casual reminder, pedophilia is never a gray area." Immediately after announcing her departure from Sad Milk, within 3 hours. This statement was made by iilluminaughtii and retweeted by Sadmilk.
This resulted in multiple rumors about Click starting, which, yeah, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see how, and it's really hard to say that Blair didn't know what she was doing there. I've touched on this in a previous video, but when your sole defense against accusations of spreading lies about others is, well, I didn't explicitly say anything, if people inferred more from my words or actions, then that's their issue, then that's incredibly weak, especially when you're in the public eye and are fully aware of the implications of your actions. And I gotta be honest with you, the Click overall handled this in a much more convincing way. There are multiple moments where he's comfortable admitting fault with no defense, which makes the times that he does defend himself more convincing. Unlike Blair, who always tried to rationalize her behavior while somehow claiming that she was taking responsibility.
When people came to me around this time and told me they had had a word used against them simply for being neurodivergent, I personally stopped using it in my content or for posts I read out, and also did my best to remove jokes containing the word in older content.
I want to own up to my faults and take responsibility for my actions. Furthermore, I want to take responsibility for my own involvement with a crowd I am happy to no longer associate with. I did make bad decisions, I've made bad friends, and there will forever be a bad taste in my mouth regarding some of the individuals I've spoken about today.
But I still haven't gotten to the most shocking thing to come out from all this. Now, I don't say this lightly, but the Click made a really compelling case for Blair running basically a shadow campaign against him. This included multiple examples after their splitting of Blair trying to craft the narrative that former Sadmilk members enable child-likers.
Here's the same chat room again, twisting a joke from a collab video from myself and OT. And they made a driver of the free candy van joke? Holy poo! What the frick? Really? A white van joke is your banger evidence? What is this? Are you serious? Here's the same chat room again, in what I'm assuming is suggesting that my oh my god, I'm so down with the kids boomer joke from Twitter has implications. If straws were growing on straws, this would be the straws that were being grasped at, man. What the hell?
But that's nothing. I mean, it's not like iilluminaughtii paid someone to dig up dirt on Click, right? Yeah, except he provided proof that that's exactly what she did.
He said it in a Sadmilk video, but can't remember which one, and she's over her head. I'll pay you $200 to find it, and here's the payment. She actually paid people to dig up dirt and run smear campaigns on ex-colleagues, specifically snooping through my oldest content, years of decade-old content, and compiling it.
And if that wasn't bad enough, Click also provides evidence of iilluminaughtii running several alt accounts that were dedicated to smearing him, with Blair on Discord drafting a post that this alt account eventually posted. And this evolved into obsessive behavior by Blair to ruin Click.
The alt account is gonna love this. Here it keeps going. Hey, listen, Blair, I'm putting this all together. This is all Blair replying to her own announcement under an alt account. And it keeps going. Here is the same account, Dubishmerts, on Twitter that was relentlessly harassing myself, my friends, my colleagues, my streaming colleagues, past colleagues, ex-Sadmilk members, community members, you name it. You name it. Here it is on Twitter, tagging me, tagging herself. Here it's tagging Def Noodles. Here it's tagging Midnight Palma, Damien. It's tagging Amanda the Jedi. We had her on the guest on the podcast, and you come after Amanda the Jedi? Hello, Dubishmerts. Right there, a cute artwork about myself, OT and Salty, and yep, iilluminauttii's right there with her alt account. It goes on. It keeps going. So she did this just to get back at an ex-colleague. She paid people to dig up dirt, make alt accounts, harass me for months. Why? This isn't some small YouTuber beef. This isn't people being angry at each other because, ooh, someone did a bit more work in a project or not. I need a break, man. I need a break.
So to say that this video strengthened a lot of the claims made against iilluminaughtii would be putting it lightly, as the video's reception and comments all illustrate. And you know what hurts our case even further, at least for me? Those original tweets to Legal Eagle, the ones that started this whole mess. Because with that, you have a very public and straightforward example of Blair perceiving an injustice against her where there wasn't one, developing a grudge, and then trying to publicly punish or shame that person, which is exactly what she was accused of doing by the other four. Especially since it doesn't look like she reached out to Legal Eagle privately privately to try to settle this at all. And while I admit that I'm entering the realm of speculation, I can't imagine reading those tweets and think that they portray a mature, healthy mindset, you know? But I'm gonna switch gears and talk about Wonderstruck, because his video was the next to be released, and his involvement is where this entire situation escalated to a level no one saw coming, because not even Blair's former friends could predict how far she would go in order to discredit Wonder.
My mental health, which was proudly put on display for the world to see.
You see, while the clique described Blair's efforts behind the scenes to ruin him, Wonder's experience was much more direct and disturbing, as he claimed that Blair, under the guise of generosity, gained total control over his life and used this power to manipulate him.
I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, via transportation, income, and housing.
And in Blair's aforementioned response video, she focused primarily on portraying Wonder as mentally unstable and unreliable, not to mention a lazy freeloader.
I kept him on payroll. I continued his pay, even though no work had ever been completed. Although there was only a minuscule amount of work for Wonder to do, he still managed to act up within company spaces,
which caused her to receive loads of backlash, especially because she used intimate details she learned about Wonder during their friendship to make this point. Basically, any of Wonder's low points that Blair witnessed, that was fair game in her efforts to assassinate his character. And Wonder had initially responded with a twit longer detailing some of his larger disagreements with Blair's video, with the promise of a response video soon, a promise he would eventually keep, because Wonder released an 80-minute response that immediately saw a positive reception. And what really set the tone for this was Wonder choosing to show his face, as he mostly operates as a faceless creator, much like White did. And he starts out by primarily addressing Blair's accusations against the clique, where he apparently provided a breeding ground for child likers, which he debunked rather soundly. To make matters worse, Wonder directly points out that Blair's actions don't align with this narrative at all.
But a personal question I would like to ask. If Blair had the information and documented evidence on a Discord server that, as she depicted, cultivated files, and truly believe this, why did she wait 3 years to come forward? Why did she allow the clique on Sad Milk or play games with him in the free time?
He then highlights that as a collaborator, Blair demonstrated unwarranted hostility towards OneTopic and clique, ultimately resulting in their exit from Sad Milk.
I'd like to clarify that OT did not speak over her out of disrespect, but out of a minor Discord delay, to which she said, and I quote, "Shut the up and let me talk for once." I remember it clearly. It was very nasty. Click, however, tried to remain on the call and mitigate his intentions were for the betterment of the group, but Blair kept berating him. I have never heard Click, a very extroverted and talkative man, remain so quiet. It was a very dark call.
Wonderstruck then shares a damning revelation for Blair, at least in my view. He admits that when Blair tried to spin a false narrative about these departures, he actually lied to back her up.
So she took to Reddit to falsify a narrative, which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post.
Why is this significant? Well, Us Media previously confessed to acting as Blair's enforcer, essentially supporting her in some of her problematic behavior. And his acknowledgement of engaging in such conduct with Blair significantly reduced the chance that Blair could be innocent, because now it appears more likely that the 4 creators accusing Blair of abuse are being truthful, especially when one admits to enabling her actions for a time, potentially harming their own reputation. With Wonderstruck echoing these sentiments, it only reinforces this impression. So with this united front, a clear narrative has formed. Blair behaved abusively, Oz and Wonder enabled her actions for a while, but eventually saw the error in their ways and departed. As Wonder and Oz firmly back Click and OT while owning up to their part, it makes a strong case that Illuminaughtii is largely responsible for the bulk of this toxicity. Meanwhile, Blair provided excuses for every accusation leveled against her and consistently refused to genuinely accept blame, further undermining her credibility. Wonderstruck then addresses Blair's portrayal of Sad Milk, where she had suggested that the 4 creators were poor business partners, which forced her to exhibit her controlling behaviors. More specifically, Wonder essentially echoes the clique's accusation that Blair exaggerated her importance or contribution to paint herself as a savior or victim. In Sad Milk's case, this mainly involved her claiming sole financial responsibility for producing videos. However, Wonderstruck presented presents bank statements that suggest that she was reimbursed when she had to invest her own money.
So while yes, Blair did pay for edits, she was always reimbursed for this. As you can see stated on the screen, you will find bank statements I made directly to Sad Milk during its infancy,
indicating that her claims were not entirely accurate. Wonder then goes to tackle Blair's attempts to paint him as a freeloader. This starts with him discussing his time working with Sad Milk, doubling down on being paid late at times, and provides bank statements to help support this. But where this gets serious is when he talks about Blair violating his privacy in her video.
I feel this is very contradictory to say without going into personal details than to turn around and spread personal details about my views towards life. Again, these were very private things I kept between you.
And this narrative that Blair was trying to spin, it included taking things out of context and glossing over important details. For example, when Blair discusses Wonder crashing with Oz, she failed to mention that this happened because Blair intended on becoming a landlord and actually wanted to be a landlord to essentially all of the Sad Milk members.
I have never had someone else pay my rent once in my life, and I have been living on my own since I was 18. To try to paint me as a freeloader when you also leave out that I was originally only supposed to stay until August, you were supposed to be my landlord, and that I only stayed 30 days in Colorado feels like a contorted attack on who I am as a person. It was because Blair wanted to get her hands into the real estate market and wanted to build a home, something she had discussed with other former Sad Milk members. It wasn't just me.
Wonder states that Blair portrayed him as a freeloader when he had consistently expressed discomfort at living with Oz rent-free, and such circumstances only happened because of changes out of his control after he had started a lease.
I sincerely do not understand why the conception of this home was never presented in the video. It leaves out a massive gap of context. The home I was told would be finished by August and that I could stay the summer. And the last month before moving to Colorado after finalizing my lease, I was informed that the home would be pushed back until December.
And as for Wonder trying to rip off Blair as an employee, he had Oz speak to his perspective on this, who had said this.
You weren't provided work for like a majority of the time that you were actually employed. You were kind of just literally being paid to like stand around. I might be wrong on this, but you were actively trying to seek out and find work, so it's not like you were just like freeloading off of it. From my memory, you were trying to actually earn your keep.
Now once again, it's important to note that Oz was very close to Blair throughout all of this and was actively involved in her dealings with others. Wonder also points out that Blair goes out of her way to explain the benefits that Wonder didn't take advantage of, when he only worked for her for 60 days. She did go out of her way to highlight that Wonder didn't partake in community service during his time as an employee, which Wonder flatly states was unnecessary to bring up.
I also find it unnecessary that she goes out of her way to explain the volunteer reimbursement program she has. If I didn't use any of the benefits, why is it necessary to go into detail about them? Was I expected to, in the middle of moving to a new state for the first time since I was 7, volunteer at a soup kitchen to pass the time? The reason I did not use any of these benefits was because I was employed for roughly 60 days.
Furthermore, Wonder expresses mistreatment around his termination, specifically that he was fired for not meeting deadlines, but he was fired before his deadline had actually passed.
It was here on this call that I was fired for explicitly not meeting deadlines, which I find highly confusing due to once more I must reiterate that my deadline was August 2nd.
There were issues with his software corrupting, which he says led to him flying back and forth to Colorado so that Oz Media could fix it. This apparently led to his termination, though Wonder specifically notes that throughout all of this, he had been dealing with Blair subtweeting about him. Basically, passive-aggressive posts that don't use his name, but are pretty easy to figure out the context.
But I'd like to remind you that I flew to another state just to meet this deadline for my boss, who was constantly subtweeting about me. You can see is acknowledged even by one of her own managers, and they told me specifically that this was not okay behavior.
Which, yeah, that's incredibly inappropriate behavior for a boss to make tweets putting down someone working at their company. That's pretty inexcusable. He also says that the fireable offenses that Blair claims he committed, he was never spoken to about them.
I have a strict policy regarding formal disciplines, and within his short time of working with me, he had already met the criteria for termination.
Blair claims to have a strict policy on discipline, yet why didn't she or her staff ever reach out to me about this problem? Why does she not provide evidence on this comment? This was along the lines of the comment that I made. If I could be an animal for a day, I would be a furry, and my favorite food would be ass. You can't make this up, man. Total loss of income because I said as a joke, I said I was a furry. I don't know.
And overall, Wonder expressed outrage at Blair attempting to portray him as an unreliable freeloader given his attempts to contribute.
While I was in their home, if I didn't know how to help, I would oftentimes clean their home. I wanted to help Blair with her recording space as she felt stressed in her little office. I wanted to buy us plants to liven the place up. I tried at every possible turn to earn my keep. And when I felt alienated, I tried to actively find an apartment in Colorado Springs to give them both the space as I felt horrible, seemingly never being able to help in any way at all.
Wonder goes on to talk about Blair slowly gaining more control over his life.
I do in fact have a car, I have a house, and I have a job. However, the one scary thing when you put all that on a spectrum is they are all provided by one singular individual. Blair. She had a hand in every single aspect of my life, and at any moment she could take it away when she felt, which is exactly what happened.
With his car, he says that Blair insisted he allow her to get him a BMW.
Blair touches on the subject of a BMW she purchased for me. I was extremely uncomfortable with someone making such a large payment towards a vehicle on my behalf, but in Blair's words, she had the money and insisted that I get the car. After a few more discussions, she eased me into the idea that this car was a good move and would really change my life.
He then says he was starting to dissociate because he didn't know what he was doing wrong.
I told my therapist at this point that I hadn't felt real in a while, which anyone who has suffered with dissociation and dissociative episodes can all but relate to. I also reiterated how everything was starting to feel rather pointless and I didn't know what I was that's so lame. I don't like to get emotional, but I didn't know what I was doing wrong.
He wasn't assigned work, yet treated like a bad employee. He was treated like a freeloader when he resisted the circumstances of their living arrangement, and he generally no longer felt welcome at Blair's home. He then visited his father to get away, but Blair used this as an excuse to repossess his car.
A few days later, after being fired on July 27th, on July 29th, Blair came to Texas to revoke a car in the middle of the night. I asked Blair for an explanation as to how I breached my contract, to which I was ignored. Blair claims I broke the contract by the following: no proof of insurance, cars to reside in El Paso County. Okay, well, here's my proof of insurance, and here's my official mailing address during this time. You can clearly see it states Colorado.
In fact, Blair reclaimed the car while Wonder was trying to figure out how much he owed her for the depreciating value of the car.
However, when I asked to see everything my name was tied to legally with the car, which any person would do, I was met with a copy of the car contract. So I asked again to see the paperwork of the car. After this message, I never once got a response.
Wonder and Oz both agreed that Wonder was showing clear intention to return it legally, yet Blair rushed to punish Wonder. And if that wasn't bad enough, the belongings that Wonder had in his car were stolen and thrown out.
I sent her one last text stating I would be ceasing communication and that she could reach me and make arrangements for my belongings via my father's number. Not one attempt was ever made. And now I wake up and all my belongings are gone. What she fails to show in her video is my skateboard, both my Sad Milk and Wonderstruck Guy play buttons, my $800 GoPro set, and a whole list of other items I was prohibited from obtaining. These items were subsequently thrown in the trash.
And when Wonder tweeted about this happening, he was threatened with a lawsuit, which is especially outrageous when you remember Blair's previous conduct in tweeting about him. He then described feeling powerless as Blair threatened him with lawsuits whenever he attempted to make things right. He then addresses the most controversial part of Blair's video, her exposing various aspects of his mental health.
Which leads me to my next and most painful section, my mental health, which was proudly put on display for the world to see.
Specifically, Wonder talks about struggling with childhood trauma and OCD, which made him especially vulnerable. The opportunity that Blair presented came to represent a chance for Wonder to be successful and be able to afford resources such as therapy. He then stated that he perceived Blair's actions in response to his suicidal episode to have been insincere. Specifically, he showed anger at her for sending police to his house after the episode had concluded.
So when Blair claimed she sent authorities to my house for a wellness check, she didn't care about me. She put in her own Google Drive that I brought the mention of God to the table and she was locking the cars away and was scared, leaving out that the weapon in reference was aimed towards me. Also, something I'd like to note is that I wasn't there when Blair called 911 to send authorities to my home, but depending on her wording, it could have gone very wrong. To tell authorities there is a mentally unwell man with a weapon, that can go so very bad, so very fast.
Wonder went on to discuss Blair portraying him as a negligent dog owner to his dog James, to the detriment of Blair's dog Casper.
Now we're on to a bit of a lighter topic, because anytime I think of my dog, it brings a massive smile to my face. I love this dog with all of my heart.
And in essence, much of this followed Blair's tactics up until this point, which involves saying things that aren't untrue, but are instead missing context that paint a different picture. For example, the dog arriving without even a collar or food. Well,
I did bring dog food. It was just about half a bag though. James's brand of dog food is also specific to a store in Texas known as HEB, so I had to find him a new specific kind of dog food as he had a sensitive stomach. As for his collar, James did have a collar, but it was old and starting to wear. I went to PetSmart on my second day in Colorado and bought him a brand new dog tag alongside a red plaid collar, a collar which he still wears to this day.
And certain interactions between the two dogs, Wonder says stemmed from Blair's dog being a puppy and rougher. Wonder also responded to the claim that he let his dog out by accident by confirming exactly that.
I personally messed up and I take full accountability for it happening. I left James out in the backyard, but what pet owner hasn't made a mistake like this once or twice in their life? Sometimes someone forgets to close the door or the gate or whatever and it happens. It's a story as old as time. It doesn't mean you don't care about the dog, it just means an accident happened.
And again, personally, that to me, the idea of saying, I messed up, that is totally on me. I just don't think that one mistake is enough to make sweeping statements about my character. That's a lot more compelling than Blair excusing every action by saying she was forced to, while saying she's apologizing, but not really. He even goes into missing context from James escaping, which is that it only happened due to damage in the fence.
Blair leaves out that the way James got out was because a fence wire broke loose, undoing some of the fencing along a post, allowing a small entryway into the neighborhood. Had this not come undone, James would be sitting on the dog beds waiting, which again, James being outside is my fault, but the fence failing is just human error.
And as for the incident of James making a mess in the house, once again, Blair refrains from mentioning that Wonder was sleeping as opposed to making an active decision to not do anything. If you're keeping track, this mirrors how Blair accused Click of negligence towards abuse, especially when you consider that Wonder and Oz state that Wonder was already awake and cleaning the mess before Blair had discovered it.
You were actually like very well awake and already cleaning the mess up when we had actually got upstairs. And you know, Blair and I, of course, we weren't happy to see that initially, but when we had gone upstairs, you were already cleaning up the mess.
And Wonder's final point with Blair was directly accusing her of lying. Wonder had claimed that Blair was living in filth while living in Oz's home, and Blair responded to that claim harshly.
What was the point of this, Wonder? Why would you even bother posting something like this except to humiliate me? This was a room that we told you we were using to move, and we let you know it was off limits to you. That photo alone shows your consistent lack of respect for Oz's and my boundaries. And Wonder, I am sorry that I was ever friends with you.
Wonder refutes her claims by revealing that the photos he used to make this case were sent to him by Oz, long after Wonder had moved out from the house. He even has Oz elaborate on this experience.
There was no clean. It was always like that. It wasn't just one room, it was every room. And she would never help with cleaning. It was always me. I was always the one breaking down all 800 of her Amazon boxes. I was always the one doing anything cleaning wise. It just felt like I was there to clean up her mess.
Boxes, trash, cups of mold, all sent to me again 2 years after I left Colorado.
He then ends the video by talking about and with Oz. Again, Oz was named consistently as being close with and often an enabler of Blair. Oz ended their friendship earlier this year before this all went down and has expressed deep remorse for his actions during this time. Wonder provided the apology that Oz sent to him personally, saying that while he was initially very skeptical, he does accept Oz's apologies.
But over the last few months, Oz has made countless efforts to prove not only to me, but to every other former Sad Milk member that he truly was sorry for the role he played in anything that took place. I don't blame him for his role. He was in an abusive situation and had every reason to fear Blair. I feared her too for a very long time.
So if the Clicks video was already devastating for Illuminati's image, I can't think of a word that does justice to how much worse Wonder's story left her looking. And we're only halfway done with her accusers, but between the release of Wonder's video and OneTopic's, how is Blair responding to these developments? Well, at first, it seemed like Blair's plan was just to ignore this until the controversy blew over. She resumed posting on the Illuminati channel like normal, ignoring the swarms of dislikes and people unsubscribing. But for whatever reason, she is done using that approach. On May 26th, Blair released a series of tweets directly calling the accusations false, which was probably a bad start because Click and Wonder provided a lot of evidence of their claims, and Blair's statement was vague from start to finish. She goes on to promise transparency and accountability as she handles the situation, as well as a commitment to responding and ensuring that truth will prevail. So, wow, okay, being transparent about your approach with every step is a great way to clear her name if this is all somehow a hoax, right? Problem is, Blair has already failed to live up to this promise and seems to be moving in the opposite direction, sending Wonder a cease and desist to prevent him from commenting any further on this issue, which is actually something Wonder specifically called Blair out for in the past, of basically using her expansive resources to bully adversaries into silence with lawyers. For example, Blair threatened legal action against Wonder in the past for tweeting about her while she herself was tweeting about him.
For my boss, who was constantly subtweeting about me, you can see is acknowledged even by one of her own managers, and they told me specifically that this was not okay behavior.
And Wonder has announced his intention to actually fight Blair on this, launching a GoFundMe for his legal fees. And to give you an idea of how massive this has become, Wonder has raised almost $15,000 in just 3 days, and it's definitely more by now. And as if Wonder wasn't already likable enough, he pledged to donate any excess funds to the Trevor Project and provide receipts of how he spends every cent of what he raises. Which frankly, it's awesome to see some actual transparency in this situation. I mean, Blair is yet to release any kind of statement on why she's trying to silence Wonder after pledging transparency. It seems like silencing your accuser just because you have more money than them would be the opposite of that, right? But as Blair's retaliation ramped up behind the scenes, OneTopic finally released a video detailing his experience, and his tone throughout makes it clear how disappointed he was to see things develop to this point. In fact, he immediately states how disinterested he was in this kind of drama.
I still maintain an entire lack of interest in pointing fingers over petty things. But not speaking about at least some of what has now been brought up has left a vacuum that can be filled with doubt towards a friend of mine and myself. And without ambiguity, I wanted to address the parts that I was present for that I feel were misrepresented and lied about.
And he expresses a lot of grievances with Blair throughout his video. But right away, he shows particular frustration at her putting words in his mouth in order to attack the Clique, especially since the two are still good friends.
Just to clear the air on that side, since I feel at least a little bit like some words were put in my mouth.
OT then begins to share gripes with Blair's actions surrounding Sad Milk, specifically that he was unhappy to see Blair continuously provide a false narrative in why Sad Milk disbanded.
And my friends and I left the project when the good no longer outweighed the bad. Anyways, Illuminaughtii has dropped a video about it, one that at the time of recording this is still up, and it should be taken down. Take it for what you will, but a lot was framed incorrectly or was outright false.
He also states that Click and Wonder's depiction of Sad Milk was far more accurate to his experiences than how Blair described it.
A lot has been said about it already in Click's and Wonder's videos. I agree with their recounting as I remember it the same way.
Which again spells some real trouble for Illuminaughtii. If everyone is agreeing that she was the root of Sad Milk's toxicity, especially when these four creators have been in conflict with each other in the past, the standard for what Blair has to do in order to clear her name just keeps rising. Because what would these four have to gain from framing Blair? They're not responding to accusations from her where it might make sense to lie. They all independently chose to share their piece about this, though I guess we'll see. OT goes on to say that Blair's claims that members of Sad Milk were failing to uphold their financial responsibilities was just untrue. In fact, he states that all of the creators found themselves in different financial situations, so they would typically agree to let the more affluent members take on some additional costs so that their friends who are smaller creators could still participate in the project.
It became pretty clear early on that a couple members couldn't really afford the cost of a fun side project, and we had conversations as a group about how to solve for that. One solution discussed, for example, was the rest of the group taking on those costs. For example, when we found out that one of the group members couldn't get the 100K plaque because they couldn't afford the cost of it, we discussed pitching in together with our earnings to get it for them. It wasn't some debt that they'd owe, but just something that we could do for them so that we could all celebrate together.
OT then addresses Blair's claims about Click fostering an unsafe environment for children by directly calling her a liar who put words in OT's mouth.
It made me uncomfortable to hear words or intentions put in my mouth regarding the group call, whose framing in the video does not comport with reality. The retelling of how our group conversation went and using it as a way to frame the situation as Click not actioning soon enough or responding timely is simply a lie.
Additionally, OT doubles down on Click's recollection of those events, that someone was acting inappropriately, this all happened while Click was sleeping, but the issue was resolved with the urgency it required. Also, OT criticizes Blair for how she responded to the situation, where she immediately freaked out and began to jump to conclusions about Click before either of them even spoke to him about this.
And I thought the best way to clear this up would be to just talk to him. It felt weird that we hadn't yet.
OneTopic then accuses Blair of misrepresenting his messages regarding this event. Specifically, the message where OneTopic states that he doesn't want access to the screenshots of the inappropriate Discord user. Blair seemed to strongly imply that the message was sent out of sheer disgust and discomfort towards Click.
And I shared these files with them. And OneTopic opened the files, he was horrified, and he said, and I quote, "I've read one and I don't want access to those screenshots."
But in actuality, that's not what OneTopic says happened. To the contrary, OT states that Blair kept harping on about the banned user and wanted OT to extend his involvement with the situation, despite it being already resolved. That message, according to OT, was basically him saying he doesn't want access to those screenshots because they're disgusting, and him going through them, as Blair was trying to force him to do, was upsetting him for no gain.
Near the end of the call, Illuminaughtii stated that she wanted me to see the screenshots to fully understand the gravity of the situation, and I conveyed that since everything was already discussed and solved, I really didn't want to see the messages of a banned Discord person, and I was told it was important to look at them. So wanting to keep the waters calm, I opened the folder and I looked at one of the screenshots, and then I reiterated in written text what I'd already conveyed, which was that I had no interest in having access to the screenshots.
And generally, OT expressed satisfaction with Click's handling of that situation. In fact, he had even said back then that he was worried that Blair would draw the worst possible conclusion from what was ultimately a non-story, and he humorously points out that years later she's done exactly that.
And she woke me up a while ago with a lot of concerns, so I was just sticking around to make sure that she didn't take things to the worst conclusion.
After putting the claims against the Click to rest, OneTopic moves on to the call that resulted in his leaving Sadmilk. See, all the creators speaking out against Blair have agreed that during OT's final call with Sadmilk, she screamed and cursed at him for unintentionally interrupting her.
I'd like to clarify that OT did not speak over her out of disrespect, but out of a minor Discord delay, to which she said, and I quote, "Shut the f up and let me talk for once." I remember it clearly. It was very nasty.
OT said that Wonder's recollection of those events best matches his experience, but he also adds context that somehow makes all of this even worse. Specifically, the meeting was being held during a period that OT and Click had scheduled as time off because they needed a breather from the project.
And when we were told the meeting was to take place, it was during that time off that we had scheduled. Time we needed to step away for a breather.
And while he doesn't specifically state that Blair was the one to schedule the meeting, that seems to be what he was alluding to. And throughout this segment, OT demonstrates a level of pain towards this whole exchange and ultimately says this on his decision to leave Sadmilk.
It became clear during the meeting that me simply staying involved in the project was unhealthy for me, but also that my participation was seen as antagonistic. I don't know what she needed, but whatever it was, whatever kind of help it wasn't what a friend could give. And I don't think I was one at that point. And that sucked.
OneTopic then shares how he and Click announced to Sadmilk that they would be leaving. More specifically, both emphasized a desire to not make a big deal out of their departure, possibly by not even announcing it at all and just fading out.
I don't plan on having a public announcement made, just let it fade out smoothly, with a new style of content that might actually happen naturally.
Currently, I will be stepping away from Sadmilk. I don't have any public messaging planned, as any change, such as someone leaving, can make people feel like a project is on rocky footing, and I don't want my personal exit to be the cause of yet more drama.
And this is in stark contrast to what Blair actually did. She announced their departure on the Sadmilk Twitter, and then within hours she tweeted out on her personal Twitter that child likers are bad, heavily implying that there was someone in her life recently that disagreed with this sentiment. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Sadmilk Twitter retweeted that. Again, this was all within a few hours, so rumors began to run rampant about Click and OneTopic, and it quite frankly doesn't take a genius to figure out how. And I don't know how you could possibly argue that that wasn't Blair's intention. She 100% knew what she was doing, or is the dumbest YouTuber in the history of the internet, and I don't think it's the latter. Furthermore, OneTopic discussed Illuminaughtii lying about their departure on her main Reddit account, where she stated that OT and Click never stepped up to the plate. And recently, Wonder had stated that this was an outright lie that he had actually helped spread.
She took to Reddit to falsify a narrative, which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways, and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post.
So now you have OneTopic, Wonder, and Click all saying that Blair has a pattern of overstating her contribution to various efforts, and this seems to be yet another example of how.
But the fact remains, she wasn't the one who saved my channel.
So while yes, Blair did pay for edits, she was always reimbursed for this.
Moving on from his discussion on Sad Milk, OneTopic joined the Click, Wonder, and basically all of the internet in calling Blair out for exposing Wonder's mental health the way she did, where she weaponized the vulnerability that this group shared with each other as friends.
Struggling with mental health was something I related to strongly with other members of the group, and we talked pretty openly about it. Our fears, our insecurities. One thing I never thought would be released was personal details about a group member's mental health or their struggles. I figured those kind of personal details would be off limits and no way would be used as a weapon.
But even further, the Click had previously proven that Blair was using various alt accounts to harass and slander Click and OneTopic. And OneTopic agrees that this harassment was done by Blair.
We were surprised by the Reddit posts. Certainly. The details from the troll account were so specific.
And more specifically, Blair was using these alts to keep calling attention to decade-old actions by Click in order to ruin his reputation and OT's by association.
And I know he apologized for his words that he said when he was 15 and Swedish. And learning English as a second language. However, the account targeted his apology, said it was bad, and continued on to ping others. It became clear the harassment was not intended to stop.
And if that sounds like a reach, OT shows excerpts of Blair's alt attempting to use this bad PR to drive a wedge between the two friends, basically trying to ensure that OT's career couldn't survive if he were to be friends with Click.
And OneTopic is friends with someone while pretending to be wholesome and good. I think OneTopic is a liar and a sham, and has been pandering to our community. If he stays friends with someone like this, he is using us for money. It was such specific phrasing and sounded so familiar.
Which lends a lot of validity to Oz's claims that Blair had isolated him and ultimately cost him multiple friendships. And Blair trying to spread rumors didn't stop with Click and OT. In fact, there was another former member of Sad Milk, Salty, who OT actually asked to respond to an accusation that Blair had made on an alt account. Specifically, Blair alleged that OT and Click basically poached Salty away from Sad Milk.
Did you leave Sad Milk because we were paying you better on the podcast?
No. No. Wait, I was getting paid?
Shut up, Salty.
By doing this, Blair was trying to set the narrative that OT and Click leaving Sad Milk was a betrayal of their community. Basically, the Sad Milk viewers should be taking this personally and turn on the two. Which, again, wow. But that's not even close to where this ends. OT stressed in this video how much he values his privacy as a creator, and he had discovered Blair was doing everything in her power to undermine that.
Private details about members of the group who left were being spread around maliciously when I was DM'd by a concerned community member who had been talked to. The message was concerning offline information. It later became clear who that information had originated from, and this was later independently corroborated by a creator who had come forward to me who had witnessed this.
And all of this coming from Blair, it took a clear toll on OneTopic, with him even saying he wouldn't mind if Blair just said negative things about him provided she did it the right way.
I don't care that mean words were said about me or that mean words will still be said about me. There is a distinct difference between privately venting and purposefully spreading of harmful lies.
And in the aftermath of Blair's crusade, OT shares that he's been forced to be wary about who he interacts with or lets interact with his content because they could find themselves targeted by those sent by Blair, which would once again demonstrate that Blair has a tendency to try and isolate people that she holds a grudge against as much as possible. OT then expresses gratitude towards his support system, but also expresses a level of denial at just how much Blair tried to ruin him, as well as, well, see for yourself.
I still don't want to believe all of this is true. The only kind of person who could slander their friends like this is someone who is darkly unremarkable.
Yeah, he's pissed, and quite frankly, I don't blame him. Friendships, relationships, partnerships, they end. That's just part of life. But it says a lot when someone's going out of their way to hurt someone as much as possible who likely never intended them any harm in the first place. OneTopic then addresses Blair directly and echoes the sentiment shared by the clique, which is that iilluminaughtii simply took this way too far.
This isn't some small YouTuber beef. This isn't people being angry at each other because, ooh, someone did a bit more work in a project or not.
What you did was unacceptable and goes so far beyond any petty beefs or squabbles or hurt feelings. This wasn't just trying to separate yourself from us like we asked for. You acted like this was a war and that you should be recruiting soldiers to come after us. You lied. And I can only think that's because you wanted us gone. You wanted these lies to come into our everyday life offline.
And OT directly calls out Blair's demonstrated pattern of destroying someone just for being a former friend.
These people who were your friends, and then when they finally couldn't take how you treated them, you immediately turned on them and worked to isolate them from their friends and their communities.
And OT ultimately shares his piece about Blair, clearly hurt and pained by what he clearly sees as a situation that was wholly avoidable.
But when we explained our boundaries, it just wasn't good enough. That kind of resentment builds up. It doesn't mean we hated you or that we could never reconnect down the road.
He then closes out his video by addressing common questions he expects to receive. This includes revealing that he had considered legal action against Blair in the past, but doesn't intend on actually pursuing that route unless Blair leaves him no other choice.
Stay tuned to see if I get sued, I guess.
And throughout this video, OT seems to emphasize that he and the other former Sad Milk members are in fact on good terms. He states that he spent the last month talking to them and figuring out together what they're going to do about this whole situation. And he ends his video with a clip of the guys just hanging out together to pay tribute to the friendships formed across Sad Milk that weren't toxic.
Wonderstruck, where are your shoes? Wonder, barefoot. Wonder, go inside. Where are you? Where are your shoes? My only hope. The Epistle Lost Media is chasing me!
But that leaves us with our last story from Oz Media. So, what was he up to during the nearly 5-month gap between iilluminaughtie's video and his? Since the situation broke, Oz's main appearance online has been a feature in Wonder's video where he helped corroborate Wonder's claims of being mistreated by Blair. Aside from that, Oz has been mostly silent, with the exception of a few tweets and YouTube comments. This has included Oz sharing that he received a cease and desist from Blair, despite him being the only one to not yet make a video about her. Even worse, a second cease and desist letter was sent to Oz's father for seemingly no other reason than to make those around Oz suffer, which, to be fair, matches the recurring accusation that Blair tries to isolate people that go against her by attacking those around them. Despite this, Oz still intends to release his expose on iilluminaughtii, to which Blair seems to have retaliated by seizing Oz's home, to which he responded by launching an incredibly successful GoFundMe for his legal fees, despite it briefly being taken down for false reporting. So where does all of this lead us? Well, Oz Media finally posted a video on iilluminaughtii, and it looks like this is only the beginning, as this wasn't even the huge expose that Oz has been working on, but there were still some major reveals. The largest reveal being that he and Blair were actually involved in a romantic relationship.
Blair and I dated. We started when I was 20 and she was 28. And currently, I'm 23. Almost 24.
And that Blair allegedly used this relationship to coerce Oz into submitting to her socially and financially. And if that sounds familiar, Wonder shared similar experiences throughout his friendship with Blair.
I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, be it transportation, income, and housing.
And the similarities go even further, as it's another example of Blair allegedly exploiting a younger and less experienced employee with terrible financial agreements that can be used to punish them, much like what happened with Wonder's car.
A few days later, after being fired on July 27th, on July 29th, Blair came to Texas to revoke a car in the middle of the night. I asked Blair for an explanation as to how I breached my contract, to which I was ignored.
In fact, a lot of this situation perfectly mirrors Wonder's experiences with Blair. Oz even points out just how eerie the similarities are.
As you can see with Wonder, Blair has a habit of taking advantage of younger men, 8 years younger than her, and their financial illiteracy for her own personal gain.
Oz also shared that the complicated nature of this relationship is only adding stress in the production of his video, because he doesn't want something so important to unintentionally devolve into a bitter ex's flawed recollection.
Blair and I dated. We were a couple for a decent chunk of time. This puts me in an ungodly complicated situation of doing everything that I can to try and separate the relationship drama from the public drama, as in the process of dating her, there are a lot of things which I bore witness to.
And on top of that, he expands on his tweet that Blair was trying to seize his home.
What I can only describe As retaliation from the person who's my ex, former employer, and prior colleague, Blair is in the process of currently foreclosing my home.
According to Oz, Blair started to exploit his finances for personal gain during their relationship. This included using Oz's superior credit to secure the car given to Wonder. This resulted in a financial burden that led to Oz asking Blair for help as she was far more affluent.
This would lead me to asking Blair, my partner, for financial help. Financial help for things such as my home, which she was living in. Help from my partner, who at any given time would be making up to 30 times my monthly income.
But rather than provide support as a partner that was living in Oz's home, she kept track of all this debt in a ledger that Oz would eventually be expected to pay back. Which, yeah, seems unusual if they were partners providing mutual aid based on what they can each offer, yet Oz wouldn't be reimbursed for things like the hits to his credit from loans being taken out in his name. Even worse, Blair had apparently told Oz that she committed embezzlement in order to help him, as she used company funds instead of her own.
And while I can't remember if this exact word was ever used, she essentially explained to me that because she used company funds to assist me, that she had committed embezzlement.
Blair presented a deed of trust as the only way Oz could prevent her from facing legal trouble, which is obviously quite a lot of pressure to put on a partner. But that deed of trust would essentially leave Oz's home as collateral until he paid back the almost $200,000 that he was listed as owing Blair, across 10 years of $2,500 monthly payments. And if Oz fell behind on such a steep bill, Blair could essentially seize his home.
This document gave her the power to foreclose if I was unable to make a monthly payment of nearly $2,500 for nearly a decade.
And if that's not bad enough, Oz explains that his mother was arrested for embezzlement when he was a child, and this leaves him believing that Blair may have intentionally made him relive this trauma so that Oz would be easier to manipulate.
Blair was aware of this past of mine. Whether this was used against me, I can't say for certain, but the idea of another person I loved being locked away, but this time for my actions, words cannot describe the guilt that I had.
And while the ledger only grew, Oz felt as though he wasn't in a position to clarify what he owed due to both the guilt of him needing help, but also what sounds like pretty blatant manipulation by Blair, where she would allegedly shame Oz for his finances to anyone who would listen.
From her friends, to my friends, to her employees, to hell, even her Discord staff, about my finances, oftentimes unprompted. Guilt involving the fact that everyone I interacted with on a day-to-day basis looked down on me for her words towards me.
And Oz ultimately lands on Blair doing this to chip away at his mental health and fill him with enough shame that he wouldn't be able to question her.
Actively putting me in a position where she was chipping away at my mental health. I was afraid to tell anyone.
And while people do get too eager to villainize any relationship with an age gap of more than a month, I do think this is actually a good example of an exploitative one. At 28, Blair's brain was fully developed and she was a business owner with much stronger finances, while Oz was barely more than a teenager and probably didn't have the ability to recognize when someone was taking advantage of him yet, since that's kind of a skill you gain from experiencing bad relationships. Oz expresses that Blair laid the groundwork to paint him as a parasite, so that he would be too ashamed to get help.
I was afraid to tell anyone what was happening because she had convinced me that I was a parasite, that I avoided telling anyone who could have helped me see what was happening out of fear of further confirmation. More eyes looking down on me.
Which also mirrors Wonder's story exactly, where she allegedly did everything possible to paint him as a freeloader both privately and publicly in order to prevent him from getting support.
I have never had someone else pay my rent once in my life, and I have been living on my own since I was 18. To try to paint me as a freeloader feels like a contorted attack on who I am as a person.
Even more, this apparently followed her coercing Oz into relying on her more financially, which was also the case with Wonder.
But in Blair's words, she had the money and insisted that I get the car. After a few more discussions, she eased me into the idea that this car was a good move and would really change my life.
Also, Oz echoed Wonder's sentiment that Blair has a habit of gaining complete control of those around her.
How over time, Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, be it transportation, income, and housing.
When you're around Blair, your world revolves around her. In my case, my home was hers, despite her name not being on it. I had no friends out in Colorado, a state that I moved to at the behest of Blair. Only Blair's friends were out here. All of my connections had to be approved by her. I wasn't allowed to be friends with people she didn't like. I was even in a position where my finances were nearly entirely controlled by her, from what debts I took on to later being the fact that she was the person who signed my paychecks.
And these parallels go even further, as Blair would become Oz's employer and have additional control over his life as a result, while framing this control as generosity, which also echoes Wonder's claims shockingly well. And if that's not bad enough, Oz also took a position at Blair's company for a reduced salary in order to help pay his debt.
Hell, I even took a position in her company at a lower pay to try and pay this debt back. Offered to work with her in her crypto farm for free to pay back the debt.
Which, yeah, it's a bad look for Blair to have an ex-partner describe being coerced into financial reliance, and oh, it just so happens providing Blair with free labor would help fix this. In fact, Oz elaborates that it would have been impossible for him to even try to keep up with the $2,500 payments unless he continued this arrangement with Blair. And Oz claims that Blair knew this and possibly ensured that he would inevitably fall behind on these payments without her.
Blair knew that even with my income working for her, that this wasn't possible. It feels as though she knew that I would be destined to fall behind.
And with Oz being paid so little, he even expressed that iilluminaughtii's stark rise into financial success on YouTube was largely because of his contributions, but that wasn't reflected in how much he was paid.
While I worked for Blair's company, I helped improve it in any way that I could with my knowledge of how YouTube worked. I was able to assist in the push for Blair's channel to make the sudden and stark rise into a new payout range of 6 figures a month. All while I was being paid not even enough to get by with my monthly bills.
In fact, he dedicated so much time to helping the Illuminaughtii channel operate that he neglected his own channel for a year.
While also trying to help save her channel. This would lead me to up and almost entirely abandon my channel throughout the year of 2022.
And Oz shared that he didn't fully understand just how messed up this dynamic was until more recently, which also echoes Wonder's experience.
It wasn't until recently when I explained my situation to my parents, my friends outside of Blair's control, that I began to understand just how perverse my life had become for nearly 3 years.
And all of this climaxed in December of 2022, where Oz described being coerced into signing a legal agreement with Blair penned by her lawyer while Oz didn't have the ability to afford representation at all.
When I was 23 and Blair was nearly 31, Blair, with her lawyer, would create an honestly quite confusing legal document for me to sign where I would agree to pay back her debt. Blair, being the person who signed my checks, knew that I couldn't afford legal representation.
On top of that, this agreement would lead to Oz basically having to work for Blair for free.
Everything I made working for her was going right back into her pocket.
And Oz goes on to set the tone of how he was coerced into signing such an agreement.
Blair would bring me to her lawyer's office, put me in a room alone with the two of them, with papers in front of me. Papers which I foolishly signed for a myriad of reasons, ranging from Blair expressing that this would mend our relationship, that it was the right thing for me to do.
And what makes this even worse is that despite Blair dangling the promise of reconciling their relationship in order to get Oz to sign this agreement, that didn't happen.
It wouldn't be until a few weeks after signing that document that I would learn that she had already moved on, and had almost everyone in my daily life keep this fact a secret from me.
Oz even clarifies that he would be perfectly okay with paying back his debts, but takes issue with the fact that this is hitting Oz so close to home out of retaliation for him speaking out against abuses experienced at the hands of his ex.
I'm not trying to escape any debt that I may rightfully owe Blair. I just don't want to lose my home or lose it from retaliation.
Now, the second major takeaway from this video was the status of Oz's full expose on Illuminaughtii, because believe it or not, this wasn't it. He shared that the video was still in production with a manuscript of over 100 pages and with over 3 hours of footage. However, he finds himself financially and mentally needing to resume his output of usual content, meaning he'll be working on both side by side.
I need to, and more importantly, I want to, continue my regular content so I can afford to live day to day.
He's also been in contact with multiple other individuals to get their experiences with Blair, and this is part of why his video has been taking so long. Oz's manuscript was originally only 20 pages long, but as he tries to uncover the experiences of others, it leads him deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
Interviews, questionnaires, screenshots, the works. All from a number of individuals.
Which also means that this video is going to be way more comprehensive than I think any of us could have expected, even more so than the videos released by the other members of Sad Milk so far. Though Oz speculates that Blair has been vigilant of this possibility all along.
To me, it feels like Blair is taking every course of action that she can to prevent this video from being produced.
Oz also expresses that he intended to have his expose released by now, but various factors made that more difficult than he initially expected. So, with such stresses consuming his life, Oz is choosing to prioritize his health health, which I think we can all understand.
It's obvious to me that I need to focus on myself and not destroy my well-being for this video.
Then you have Oz's GoFundMe. It's really important to note that in all of this, Illuminaughtii is one of, if not the most affluent parties in this situation, especially when compared to Oz Media and Wonder. Wonder previously participated in crowdfunding to pay for his legal fees in this fight against Blair, and Wonder eventually did the same. Now, so far, OneTopic and Click have not mentioned legal action being taken against them, but have shown support for what Wonder and Oz are facing. And dipping my toe into the realm of speculation, there are a couple of reasons I could think for why Click and OT might not be facing legal threats so far. I think it's either that OT and Click may have similar resources to Blair to be able to actually defend themselves in court, unlike Oz and Wonder, or what I think is more likely, but again this is a gut feeling, OT and Click were never Blair's employees. If I had to guess, it's far more likely that Blair intends to argue that Oz and Wonder are in violation of some contract they signed as her employees, unlike OT or Click. Wonder even specified that Blair would abuse an NDA he signed to silence him, despite her not even abiding by the terms of that very agreement. Blair might be hoping that sufficiently scaring the more vulnerable people to speak out against her could make OT and Click silent in order to not make things worse for their friends. Though Wonder and Oz are also the only ones to reside in the US, which might make them more realistic targets for Blair than pursuing international lawsuits with a Canadian and Swedish resident. Who knows, if we're lucky, maybe Legal Eagle can explain and bring this full circle. But on the topic of this crowdfunding, Oz elaborates on the GoFundMe he had posted, saying that none of the money being donated to him will go to Blair, but instead to the other expenses that he's currently facing, with particular focus on his legal fees. Much like Wonder, this will include full transparency on how the money is being spent. Which, with Blair apparently trying to silence anyone she can, it's great to see some actual transparency in this mess, even if she was the first one to promise it. But that's where we are now, and we're left with a few key takeaways that I think are worth pointing out. For starters, Oz. Oz was named in everyone else's stories as being somewhat of an enforcer for Blair, but despite that, he's now on good terms with all of the members of Sadmilk. And while Oz's consistent willingness to own up to his actions already suggested something strange being behind this dynamic, wow, this video does that even more. This isn't even Oz's main video yet, but the dynamic he presents throughout his relationship to Illuminaughtii, where she routinely coerced him into behaviors he wasn't comfortable with, in my opinion, that goes a long way to explaining how Oz could have been easily manipulated to go along with her toxic actions for so long, especially since he's taken accountability for that to the satisfaction of those affected by this behavior.
I was highly skeptical, which I made note of, but I listened, and as we began to talk once again, we started to connect the dots and find so much context that had been left out between us. I was still very much on edge with my trust, but over the last few months, Oz has made countless efforts to prove not only to me, but to every other former Sadmilk member that he truly was sorry for the role he played in anything that took place. It shows a tremendous amount of strength, and Oz will always have my respect as a person for what he has done. I don't blame him for his role. He was in an abusive situation and had every reason to fear Blair.
Especially since Wonder expressed that he had been coerced in similar ways by Blair.
Audience members grew confused about this, so she took to Reddit to falsify a narrative which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post. I believed Blair had my best interest at heart and was being thorough with me. I have since been proven that this was far from the case.
And there's one thing I want to elaborate on, which is why I believe these 4 accusers so far. Because no, I don't typically shy away from pointing out when accusations seem to be accompanied by sinister or misleading intentions. And as I've said on this channel before, I don't typically like personal conflicts being brought to the internet because even with the best of intentions, bias or the high of what you think is justice can be incredibly hard to keep in check. But there is a huge exception, which is when you have reasonable suspicion of abusive behavior continuing, and this is the only way to stop it. And this is exactly that. Blair was still using alt accounts to spread rumors about Click and OT enabling child likers. She chose to out Wonder's very personal struggles with mental health, despite that having nothing to do with any of this, and she's using financial power over Oz to assert control to this day. I would be much more sympathetic if this were a situation where Blair's low points were being used to paint a picture of her entire character, but that's just not the case here. Also, Illuminauttii's response video was horrible. She failed to refute even a single accuser's story and instead went for unrelated character assassination. And in the realm of accountability, every instance of Illuminaughtii admitting any flaw in her behavior was immediately preceded or followed by her claiming someone else was actually at fault.
Furthermore, I want to take responsibility for my own involvement with a crowd I am happy to no longer associate with.
Again, I have a much easier time giving someone the benefit benefit of the doubt when they're willing to say, look, I messed up at these points and that's on me, but on these particular instances, I don't think I'm being portrayed fairly, rather than, oh, I know all of these people with a documented history of conflict with each other are agreeing that I was personally responsible for toxic and abusive actions, but I won't even consider that they're right. The problem was actually that I was too kind. And I feel like a broken record here, but my main takeaway is still that Blair is screwed. Maybe legally there's a way for her to eke out a win, but I don't see any scenario where she's able to save her reputation. Hell, her views took an incredible hit from all of this, yet the comments and likes are still scathingly against her. And if she's still not providing any compelling evidence that we're being misled, and for the life of me I can't find any contradictions between the accusers, I would be shocked to see this turn around. Though I gotta say, I think one of the funniest PR nightmares in all this is that Blair has to refute claims of her running conspiracies against those she dislikes while weaponizing her mass influence, and her handle is literally Illuminati. But that finally brings us to the present, so what's next? Well, several other creators and even an alleged ex-partner have come forth to share their experiences with Blair, and audiences have pointed out some potentially concerning things surrounding her Discord or YouTube engagement. But honestly, I don't think it's really necessary to get into all of that, which might sound weird, but hear me out. Once it becomes trendy to hate on someone, it makes it a lot harder to understand who might just be taking advantage and making accusations because of ulterior motives. I mean, take Super Mega, where one of the accusers was revealed to be entirely misinformed for the foundation of her accusations of infidelity. She straight up admitted that this dogpiling mindset is what led to her feeling compelled to speak up.
I was surrounded by people who were telling me to come out and basically dogpile, and I did it. Yeah, I joined the dogpile.
But these four guys have such a rock solid story that is already enough to paint a damning picture of Blair. So as an outsider, I don't think it's really necessary to start bringing in weaker claims that one could possibly poke holes into and make Blair seem innocent. But the biggest thing we're waiting for is Oz, who's still working on his final expose on Blair in the background of resuming his regular content. And I cannot stress enough how much I think this basically documentary is going to do to cement the ending of Illuminaughtii's channel. Because honestly, it feels kind of unnecessary. I mean, Blair is already screwed and it looks next to impossible for her to change that. So it's wild that Oz says they have so much material to work with that we still haven't touched. Not to mention the fact that Oz's previous video on Blair was essentially glossing over their relationship, yet was arguably the most disturbing story so far, even with how little was said. If Oz is taking this as seriously as they seem to be, this video could unironically act as a monument to the hubris and ego of many content creators that often goes unnoticed, and just how far that can go when left unchecked. Because remember, this all only came out because Blair happened to start a feud over video editing. Who knows how long this would have continued if not for that, but that is everything you need to know about the downfall of Illuminaughtii so far. And if there's any takeaway here, I think it's that if you're going to make this many enemies, keep it domestic, because apparently once an international alliance is formed against you, like half of them get diplomatic immunity. In order to use your money to abuse the legal system, they apparently have to be a part of that system, or just be an adult and accept that sometimes friendships end and that's no reason to turn to the Joker. Oh no, seems simple. Bye!